on the second day of the webinar on leveraging INFF processes to finance NDCs. My colleague Tim Strawson will moderate today's discussion, but I just wanted to take a few minutes this afternoon, to recap what we covered yesterday. So yesterday we had the pleasure of hearing from Marcos Neto and Cassie Flynn about the need to integrate our work on STG and NDC using the INFF process to finance NDCs. We also heard from our colleague Jennifer Baumwall about Climate Promise. She gave us an overview of the Climate Promise, the result of phase 1, and also what we are planning to do on phase 2 that was just rolled out this year. We also got an overview of the INFF from Tim, as well as a video on the INFF. Then we covered the inception phase of the INFF with an introductory presentation on what the inception phase is about, and also heard a country example from Ecuador on how they are running that inception phase. We also heard on the first building block of the INFF, which is the assessment and diagnostic, with, again, a presentation on what it consists of and an example from Gabon. After those presentations, we broke into breakout rooms, and these breakout rooms were really, really interesting. We wanted to create a small audience, small group for people to exchange on what opportunities exist in the inception phase, as well as in the assessment and diagnostics phase, to mainstream the NDCs in the INFF process. So we use mirror board. I would just give examples of opportunities and barriers that people highlighted. On the opportunity side, there was some suggestion that it's much easier to have an NDC part of an INFF process when this NDC or climate change in general is already included in the National Development Plan. So that's like the perfect example. If we have that, then everything becomes much easier. Other opportunities would be including the Minister of Environment in the oversight committee of the INFF, using existing NDC coordination mechanism. As you know, with the Climate Promise and before the Climate Promise, there was a high demand, and countries have made a lot of effort into creating these interministerial committee on NDCs. So INFF could leverage those committees to start the process. There were also suggestions of increasing collaboration between the technical people working on INFF and the technical people working on NDCs and climate change in general, both at UNDP level, but also within the government. Other example included bringing in other stakeholders that are working on ESG reporting, that are working on green finance. So bringing those stakeholders that can really influence the INF process on the green side. Having a clear narrative on the INFF and NDC and the benefits of having the NDC included in the process. There are also examples of using climate budget tagging, which is something that has been done a lot on the NDC side, using it in the assessment and diagnostic. And also making sure that there is coherence between the different technical assessment that we, in general, are supporting, including the DFA, the biofin assessment, the CPR. So those are just some examples on opportunities. There are a lot of them. Today, we would give you a link to the mirror board to go in and take a look at what people have put in. On the barriers, it was highlighted that it's usually a scarcity of data. It's also sometimes difficult to find the people with the right technical skills to support both processes. and sometimes the financial resources are not there. The lack of coordination between the ministries, and also the question of who owns the process. So as you know, usually the INFF is led by Ministries of Finances and Ministry of Planning, while NDCs is usually led by Ministries of Environment. So having clarity on who leads and who should be part of the leadership team is something that that needs to be improved. Also, issues on a formal link between the NDC and the legal infrastructure in the countries, and the NDC not linked to global development cooperation frameworks. So again, lots of ideas yesterday, very rich discussion. Today, we will have a similar conversation towards the end after we've heard from the different presentation on the 3 building blocks that we will cover today. We will have also a breakout session on brainstorming the opportunities and barriers. But today we want to focus on what can we, UNDP, do? Not just like what should be done, but what we as UNDP can do. We support both processes, both the NDC, the SDGs, the INFF. We provide the technical assistance, sometimes we provide the financial assistance, and we also advise countries. So in our role as a technical assistant provider and advisors, what can we do to change the status quo? So I will stop there and hand it over to my colleague, Tim, who's gonna take us through the rest of the webinar today. Thank you. Over to you, Tim.
Perfect. No, thank you, Kathy, and thanks to all colleagues for joining with us for the second day today. I think it was a great discussion yesterday, and I think we're going to continue that momentum into today. So just to perhaps run through the agenda that we've got ahead of us before launching into the presentation. So yesterday, as Kathy said, we went through the first couple of building blocks, and today we're going to look at financing strategies, monitoring and review, and governance and coordination. And we've got a similar structure today as yesterday. We'll have one of our regional SDG financing advisors give a short introduction on the methodology for each of those.
Van a presentar las metodologías.
And then we will have one sharing their experience.
Vamos a compartir las
Ils vont partager leur expérience.
Me, but I can hear.
Je ne sais pas si c'est moi, mais j'arrive à entendre l'espagnol. Je pense qu'elle est sur toutes les chaînes. Elle n'a pas encore été.
Apologies, colleagues. I'm hearing all of the interpretation at once, so I'm going to.
Estoy escuchando todas las interpretaciones al mismo tiempo.
Pause for a second. I think that's better now. Thanks, colleagues. Sorry for the interruption there. So we will go through each of the building blocks with an introduction to the methodology, and then a few minutes on the country experience. And we've got a great lineup today. So we've got Amarakun from our Nigeria country office who will present on the financing strategy there. We've got Sangji and Rosemary from Trinidad and Tobago who will talk us through financing strategies. And we've got on the monitoring review, Surin will give us an overview on Surin Pogus, the methodology. And the Colombia country office will talk us through the experience there. And then finally, we have Vito Intini from our Arbas regional hub, who will talk us through the methodology on governance coordination, and Sylvain from the Egypt country office with the experience there. And then, as Kathy said, we'll continue the lively discussions that we had in the breakout rooms yesterday with some further discussion today. So to launch right into it, I will give a bit more of an introduction on Linda, if you could pass me back the hosting, share my screen, that would be great. Linda, if you could make me the host again. I'm able to share my screen at the moment. Apologies for the technical interruption. So to start on financing strategies, and just to give the methodology before we hear from Amarokun and the experience in Nigeria, just to say a few words and to remind ourselves of what a financing strategy is. I presented this slightly complex slide yesterday that shows the linkages between national sustainable development plans and aspirations at the top, financing, the investment that's needed to realize those aspirations at the bottom, and then the financing policies that public finance, public-private finance, private financial sector that government has at its disposal in order to influence those investments so that they are being made objectives of a national sustainable development plan. And the financing strategy is really the center within the financing strategy that those connections are related. And so when we think about the methodology for a financing strategy, there are a few different countries that are following different approaches, but there are a few standard steps that countries are following. The first being really to specify the specific objectives of the most are associated with a medium-term national development plan, but within countries take forward a wide range of different to their financing strategy. Some are very focused on specific resource mobilization targets. Mongolia, for example, the medium-term plan has a cost of $15 billion, $15 or $16 billion, $9.5 billion, and there are breakdowns of the types of public and private financing that's associated with those plans. In other countries, the financing strategy is geared at a slightly more strategic level, and it may not have such precise quantified estimates of costs associated with it, aiming more to catalyze more structural shifts in the financing landscape. Some are pitched at a macro level, others, like they are focused on specific priorities. And then again, some are very focused on the financing, on mobilizing and financing, and others have a varying balance between that and policy coherence issues across the financing policies. The second step, I think, is really around the INFF that has a number of processes we talked through, the building blocks, and the financing strategy really builds on, particularly in many countries, finance set out often quite a comprehensive list of financing policy options, which encompass a range of things, which encompass amplification of ideas that have existed in the country context, perhaps not been at the center of the discourse on financing, ideas that have, or innovations that have been tried successful in other countries and can be adapted to the national. And indeed, in many countries, we're seeing new innovations in new areas, and I think we'll hear a little bit more later on about some of those. So the second step beyond the specific objectives is to really identify the longer list of policy options that can be taken to mobilize and align and strengthen the governance of financing policies before a process of prioritization. And that generally has three really key questions. First is around the most significant challenges and opportunities landscape that the financing strategy can respond to. Policy solutions on the table, and then considerations of political, technical feasibility, as well as this idea of checks of those specific financing solutions to make sure that the macroeconomic coherent across the economic, social, and sustainable dimensions of a national sustainable development plan, and that they really mainstream and are cognizant of risks in the short and medium and longer term. Final stage, which many countries are just starting to approach, is the operationalization of the financing strategy. Around about 40 countries, which are the most advanced of those, are close to approving their financing strategy, and we'll hear from Nigeria in a second, and are starting to think through some of the systemic and capacity changes that will be needed in order to deliver those. So I think that gives an overview of the general methodological approach to financing strategies, although each country process is very different. and those steps are tailored to the country level. In terms of reflections around, as I've highlighted, each and priorities at the country level, but has a number of common features. So all financing strategies are embedded in the planning cycle. They are country-led and country-owned. They build a more holistic. It's not only about the role of public and private financing and the synergies across the and they're all built on this process of dialogue that brings together a wide constituency of actors at the national level. I think a couple of the key things that we're seeing, and I think there are some significant opportunities over the year and years ahead. We're seeing already, although many financing strategies are still in the process of being developed, we're already seeing a huge pipeline of financing reforms being taken forward. I mentioned yesterday, more than 250 financing reforms are already being taken forward and prioritized for immediate action. Many of those have strong connections with green and NDC objectives. And I think there's a key opportunity over the next year or year and a couple of years as these financing strategies are developed. There are many entry points with the NDC agenda to make these connections at the country level. And I think the momentum that is there and will continue to grow over the next year means that there's a really key opportunity around the development and finalization of those financing strategies and the taking forwards of the reforms that they prioritize to strengthen financing for NDCs as well through the INFF process. So I will stop there. I'll pass on to Amarakun, who will give us some insights into the experience from Nigeria. So Amarakun, the floor is yours.
Tim, before Amarakun comes on, we had some technical issues. Your voice was breaking quite often, and there was the Spanish translation stopped. So I don't know whether the Spanish interpreter can come in, and just want to make sure we have Spanish interpreter and it's working. Carolina, can you hear us? Now it's working, good. Okay, French interpretation is working as well? Yes? I'm not getting any answer. But yeah, but hopefully...
Yeah, ça passe très bien.
Okay, parfait, merci Chengwa. So hopefully the break in the voice was just on your end, Tim, because I think that also was difficult for the interpreters to hear you.
Okay, apologies, hopefully.
No, yeah, hopefully maybe it's temporary. Okay, sorry for that interruption. Amarakun, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. Can you see the slide?
Yes, we can, Amarakun, thanks. If you can make the screen.
All right, thank you very much, colleagues. This is about financing NDCs through INFF, and I'm going to share some of our experiences throughout this process. We have just almost about completed the Integrated National Financing Framework. That is what I'm going to talk now. So there are several key components in the broader INFF. The main one is the Integrated National Financing Strategy. We also have a medium-term expenditure framework, a medium-term revenue framework, INFF roadmap, as well as a monitoring and evaluation framework, and also governance and coordination framework. Nigeria being a federal country with 36 states and FCT, we thought it is good to include the fiscal federalism and coordination framework as well in the INFF process at the request of the steering committee. So the sequence to completing this whole process, we started off with an inception report after a workshop, and then now we are almost about to complete the INFS. We are halfway through, about to submit to the steering committee on the MTF, MTRS, as well as a MANI framework. And also governance and coordination framework. Fiscal federalism framework has also been done, and we have had some consultations with the relevant government authorities. We are about to go for a state level consultation very soon before finalizing. And then once these components are done, we will combine to have the broader INFF. So the basic objective of the integrated national financing strategy is basically to identify various financing sources, while also promoting coherence by aligning financial policies, regulatory frameworks, instruments, and business processes. And the methodology we have adopted here is basically we take the research stage in the diagnostics, the development financing system as a basis, and go beyond to have some consultations with the key stakeholders to get further insight, and also talk to them on the proposed strategies that we are going to have it in the INFF. As Tim mentioned, the analytical framework has 4 components: domestic public finance, domestic private finance, international public finance, and also international private finance. The way we try to source the financing options under each of these 4 areas is based on 4 categories. We look at the policy reforms and also regulatory reforms, and the type of instruments that we are going to adopt, as well as the business processes that we want to use in the financing process. In terms of what kind of policy instruments, strategies that we are going to use depends on 2 factors. One is the ease of implementation. If they are very difficult, we are not going to consider them. So we will both consider the relatively easy one as well as the moderate ones. The second one is the potential for revenue capture. If certain policies are not going to make any impact in terms of revenue, we are not going to take them, but go for the higher one and also the moderate ones. The assessment also looks at 2 critical areas. One is combating weaknesses and also leveraging its strengths. Weaknesses are basically those related to vulnerabilities to external shocks, as well as any weaknesses through institutional or policy changes. The strengths here includes initiatives that builds on what we already have, and also any opportunities that we can maximize the potential. In the action plan, briefly, it is basically the initiatives that we have developed from the 4 key building blocks that I have mentioned earlier: public-private components. And then all the initiatives are explored in depth in the financing strategy to address the challenges, and also based on these criteria that Tim also mentioned, just to justify their selection, and also relating to the categories that I have just mentioned. And then, to give you a brief intro into the potential areas under each of these 4 areas, under domestic public finance, the initiatives that we have proposed include enhancing revenue, both at the federal level as well as the state level. This includes basically adjusting the tax rates, etc., and also enhancing tax administration, coordination of the budgeted processes, modifying public spending and management practices, strengthening fiscal federalism. In fact, we are trying to even propose, I'm not saying we are proposing because this is the government one. The government has already thought about strengthening the formulas they have used for sharing revenue, innovate public debt management, especially looking at debt sustainability, and also strengthening government-owned enterprises and development financing institutions, and also look at illicit capital financial flows. In terms of domestic private finance, we look at enabling business environment, mobilizing banks and local financing institutions, promoting venture capital investment, incentivizing local investors, mobilize, just give me a second. Excuse me. Leveraging pension funds, as well as scaling sustainable financing. On the international public financing side, the focus is mainly multilateral development banks, DFIs, the ODA, export credits. And on the private side of the international sector, we have remittances, foreign direct investments, external bonds, including diaspora bonds, international commercial banks, and foundation etc. Linking this to the NDCs coming from the broader framework we have, as you can see, the integration has three components, as the SDGs indicate, the economic objectives, social objectives, as well as environmental objectives, which are linked to the Agenda 23. And then, of course, at the federal level, we have the National Development Plan, which focuses on the NCDs, as well as climate adaptation strategies, which are then linked to the INFF. In connecting with the NDCs and climate financing, the opportunities we see is that Nigeria is committed to greenhouse gas emissions, and also efforts are also made in addressing climate change, and has integrated the NDC targets in the medium-term strategy development plan already. Nigeria has also developed sectoral action plans for the implementation of NDCs, and these are some of the plus points. From the INFF, broader INFF side, the INFF complement these efforts by providing a framework for mobilizing investments toward these sectors. We will talk about it in a minute. And then there are several related initiatives we are taking on board. One is the SDG impact investments. We have already completed the investment mapping exercise, and the pipeline building is in progress. And also, Nigeria, of course, is also considering innovative sources of financing, such as green bonds and also other thematic bonds. Some of the barriers and challenges we see include the heavy reliance on the oil and gas to generate revenue. In fact, this is one of the reasons why we are trying to broaden the revenue base for Nigeria, because at the moment, 80% of the revenue is coming from oil and gas. There are also high climate risks, which influence the type of financing and grants Nigeria would be eligible to receive from donor countries. And also, assessing and managing climate-related physical and financial risks will also be a challenge. The risk related to transition to lower carbon economy will also have some challenges, especially when they relates to the biggest revenue earner, oil and gas sector, and other key sectors like cement, petrol, chemicals, and manufacturing. The existing assets and business operations in these sectors and the provision of new investment, as well as debt financing, insurance, will need to take account the current and projected future GHG emissions to manage and reduce those emissions. So those are some of the key challenges. And in terms of connecting it to the NDCs, we have several initiatives under the INFFs. One is mainstreaming shared and standard sustainability criteria to the key components of the sustainable development, linking to broader environmental, social, and corporate governance standards. Of course, through these, we have existing and future private financing incentives and lending programs, and also existing future bilateral investment treaties and free trade areas that we can exploit. And we also propose certain policy reforms, especially in relation to fossil fuel subsidies. The government has already initiated this, but there is a slowdown in the process because of the ongoing election process. We also intend to introduce adaptation of carbon taxation policy. Currently, there is none. So because of this, the first step would be to conduct a feasibility study in this regard. And also, we intend to initiate innovative sustainable financing, especially as Nigeria is one of the first to issue green bonds in Africa. So some of the considerations include debt for nature, debt for health jobs, as well as debt for nature. All right, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Amaroku, and thank you so much. I think it's a great example from Nigeria of how the country is taking forward quite a wide range of reforms with a very structured approach behind those for prioritising reforms, and great to see the connections with the NDC agenda already being made and considered. Colleagues, I do apologise for some of the technical issues we've been having, and without wanting to hold us up any further, I'll pass swiftly on now to Sangji, who's going to talk us through some of the NDC strategies, and then directly on to Rosemary to share the experience from Trinidad and Tobago with their NDC financing strategy. So Sangji, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, team. Do you hear me well? Just to confirm.
Yes, we can hear you and see your screen. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Let me try to, yeah. So, hi, everyone. It's great to see many of you joining again today. I'm Sangji Lee, also part of the Global Climate Promise team. So before we go into introducing our colleagues from Trinidad and Tobago, we wanted to kind of set the scene on what actually is NDC financing strategy, why is it important, and what are the key building blocks. NDC financing strategy essentially means enabling the delivery of investment to climate action in line with the country's NDCs and also their long-term strategies. So it includes different components, but it also includes the investment priorities and includes a lot of specific roadmap of actions and what needs to be taken forward to mobilize those resources. It is important to note that there's no defined set of principles or a set of components that has to be part of the NDC financing strategy. Some countries are calling NDC financing strategies as investment plan, or some countries have included one section on finance as part of their bigger NDC implementation plan. So that's why today we're not going to focus on those designing elements of the strategy, but rather focus on hearing from the practical experience from other colleagues. So why is it important? I took some statistics that out of 60% of developing countries that have sort of ideas for finance for their NDCs, only 15% of them actually has comprehensive NDC financing strategy. This is not a good sign, obviously, because we do have $1 trillion of investment needs for the NDCs. So that's why this workshop really comes at a good timing. Important thing about the NDC financing strategy is that it's not only about mobilizing new resources, but it is also about checking their public spendings and make sure that they're used in a smarter ways in alignment with the NDC goals or other LTS goals. So fossil fuel subsidy reform is one example of that. Finance can only flow in the right national environment that requires the capacity of the countries in monitoring, reviewing, and also the institutional and policy capacity has to come with that. So that is why financing strategy looks broader than just looking at the financing instruments, but also includes a lot of capacity building related elements as well, as you will see from the experience of Trinidad and Tobago. Just to share some of the climate promise examples, the diagram here is from the latest ambition report that UNDP has published. And here it looked at the quality of all the NDCs that have been submitted. And you see that, I think someone mentioned yesterday, that the climate promise supported NDCs have a better quality in terms of the ownerships and so on, but still we're seeing that the finance remains a big hurdle, and this is becoming more evident as we're transitioning from NDC design to NDC implementation. So to meet these demands, climate promise countries have supported, climate promise team has supported 60 countries in the NDC financing work that could include development of the NDC financing strategy, which is a comprehensive package, but also provided a bit of a subset of activities such as climate budget tracking or some of the private finance engagement or the innovative financing instruments. So as I mentioned, there's no set of building blocks for NDC financing strategies, unlike the INFF, but based on the analysis of the couple of NDC financing framework, we've seen that these are the common components that are included in the NDC financing strategy. So they are the governance, the tracking and the monitoring, the costing, which is about the diagnostics, and also about financing strategies, which is more about identifying some of the financing options. So you'll see that these building blocks are pretty similar to the INF process. So hopefully that will also give a bit of an entry point in discussing the alignment between the two. So that was a very quick overview. I was meant to explain details about the NDC financing framework. So I'll be very pleased to now introduce our colleague, Rosemary, who will share the experience of Trinidad and Tobago in developing their NDC financing strategies. So over to you, Rosemary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanji. Let me just share my screen. It's asking me if you want to stop other screen sharing, or do you want to continue? So I'm going to say no. And is everyone seeing the slide?
Thanks, Rosemary. Yes, we can see your slide.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just take you quickly through what the NDC financing experience has been for Trinidad and Tobago. For those who are not familiar, Trinidad and Tobago is a small island developing state, but we are an oil and gas exporter. So I'm trying to move the slide. It's not happening. Let me stop sharing for a minute. I'm not sure what's happening. Apologies, colleagues. I think I'm having some technical difficulties. Tim, I can't.
Rosemary, do you want us to share on your behalf?
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, Catherine. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Let me pull it up. Give me 1 second.
Great, thank you. Can we move to the second slide, please? So to provide an overview, Trinidad and Tobago developed a financial investment plan for NDC implementation, which was actually completed during COVID, which proved its own challenges. It recommended the most suitable sources and instruments of finance or NDC implementation plan, which was completed before, and estimated to require $2 billion to implement. So it provided a tool. The goal was to provide a tool for policymakers and relevant stakeholders to coordinate resources. And as you will see as we go along, it was not as clearly defined as a legal instrument, but more as a guidance document. Prior to the financial investment plan, there was no national strategy linking financing approaches to environmental concerns, but the NDC implementation plan, which was done, includes a strategy for determining financing options as one of the things that needed to be built out. Prior to the financial investment plan being done, a report was done that assessed and identified financial options that were feasible for Trinidad and Tobago as a middle-income country. Not many options. We are not entitled, the country, sorry, is not entitled to ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, and some sources of financing remain unavailable. Also, it had to, of course, be in keeping with the policy of the government with respect to what was the preferred sources of financing. But it was designed to be rolled out in 3 phases. One had to do with the initial provision of an enabling environment, so strengthening the existing instruments, standards, labeling, de-risking investment as much as possible. Once that foundation was laid, then it would move into mobilizing more of the private sector funds that were available, and then bringing that even more into the mix by looking at innovative instruments through private investment consolidation, as well as other additional instruments that could be used. Excuse me. The FIP was guided, it was initiated, conceptualized, and guided by the National Climate Change Focal Point, Trinidad and Tobago's National Climate Change Focal Point, who happens to also be located within the Ministry of Planning and Development, which was a very useful place. And it was supported by initially, we go all the way back to the Low Emission Capacity Development Program, and then the NDC support program, and then Climate Promise. So there was this support in terms of funding, but also the technical support we got through the global team, which was very helpful. And because there was a project steering committee established for those particular programs, that was leveraged to get buy-in into the financial investment plan, its concept, its data collection, its findings, its recommendations, which proved to be very, very helpful. That included the Ministry of Finance and our Ministry of Energy and Energy Affairs, the private sector, as well as civil society. Next slide, please, Catherine. So to give an idea of the methodology, the consultant that was hired reviewed the NDC implementation plan, which was a very detailed plan. Then he provided recommendations for what the enabling environment what the recommendation should be for how to strengthen the enabling environment, and then how to align those particular plan activities in the NDC implementation plan with the financial options that were feasible for the country, and then to develop the actual investment plan, which looked at phasing of the investment in those 3 categories that I just mentioned: the enabling environment, the private sector involvement, and then leveraging additional private sector investment through consolidation. Overall, it also looked at a monitoring, reporting, and verification system for climate finance, what would have been some of the methodological and technical recommendations for what that should look like, and then recommendations for continuous improvement. That included things like reassessment of the existing environment, upscaling with the upscaled NDC, so you would have to move in tandem, as well as increasing stakeholder consultation. Next slide, please. Well, this is just an idea of what is in the NDC implementation plan. It covers power generation, transport, and industry, and there's quite a bit of synergy between the areas, so that proved to be also another favorable element of being able to do the FIP. Next slide, please. So what opportunities? So the financial investment plan was not designed to be the definitive plan in terms of the guidance document. It was influenced by things like the National Environmental Policy and the National Climate Change Policy, both of which spoke to climate change mitigation and adaptation, with the climate change policy, of course, being much more targeted to the activities that would be needed to reduce our carbon emissions. I should have mentioned that the NDC for Trinidad and Tobago is strictly emissions mitigation focused. There is no adaptation component involved, and I don't, in discussions with the partners, it doesn't appear that adaptation will be included in the next round of NDC submissions, but is certainly being considered in terms of the foundation. So the FIP is seen as part of a suite of policies and strategies that are meant to guide various sectors and to allow the sectors the flexibility to adopt and adapt the recommendations to their particular circumstances and mandates under, of course, and within the framework, of course, of the National Environmental Policy and the National Climate Change Policy. So it's a complementary guidance tool. There are also, of course, fiscal measures that are being looked at. There's an e-mobility policy, there is a just transition policy, all of which will form or are supposed to be aligned to the climate change policy and the NDC implementation plan. And there's also the guidance, of course, of an very high-level interministerial committee, and that committee is critical because all of the ministries can be consulted at the same time through that coordination mechanism, and it's led by the Ministry of Planning and Development because that's where the environmental function sits. Next slide, please. What connections have been made? It's used, as I said, as a guiding framework and as a resource. It's expected to be updated and revised at the next NDC submission. There's also a carbon pricing mechanism that's being developed to allow for domestic carbon pricing, which will be one of the key instruments that will be used to support the objectives of the FIP. Next slide, please. The barriers. Before a FIP is done, you need to also assess what is feasible for the country. So the investment plan will say how to stagger and how to implement the various recommendations, but it has to be feasible for the conditions of the country at the time, the policy, the strategy, the politics, the geopolitics, the economics, etc. You also need a well-costed NDC implementation plan. Otherwise, of course, your financial investment plan may underestimate or overestimate what needs to be funded. And then, of course, navigating the landscape of an oil and gas exporting country, which is now looking to reduce emissions mainly from the sectors that are using oil and gas was a bit tricky, but the project steering committee proved to be a critical instrument and platform to have those discussions. And the climate change focal point is exceptional, I think, in terms of expertise and exposure. So that was guided at a very high level. I think that is it. Next slide, please. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't go over by too much.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Rosemary. It's really great to hear the insights into the process in Trinidad and Tobago. And thanks to you, Sangji, as well. It's very interesting, certainly, to know that so many countries through their NDC process are looking at financing. And I think we'll have to dig much deeper into the connections between those processes and the INFF financing processes. And to see, I think, what you said, Rosemary, and actually what Amarakun was saying about the financing strategy in Nigeria. You know, I think even just through those first couple of examples, perhaps we can start to understand some of the complementarities and the connections between what's often a more macro level, perhaps, financing strategy for the INFF and the FIP, as you've outlined in Trinidad and Tobago, Rosemary, focused on mitigation on specific sectors. But yet the connections between the two, both of you mentioned carbon pricing as one of the key points of focus, for example. So moving swiftly on, in order to keep up with our agenda, I'd like to introduce Surin Pogasan, who's the SDG Finance and Innovative Finance Advisor for Europe and the CIS, who's going to talk us through the monitoring and review building block of the INFF. And then Mauricio Ruiz Vega, who's the INFF Program Coordinator from Colombia, who's going to share their experience with the monitoring and review building block in Colombia. Surin.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues. Let me share the slides. So I will introduce some of the ideas and also some of the experience sharing on the building block 3. And the previous previous speakers already mentioned about the importance of the monitoring component also, but I just to visualize this, we need to understand the role and sort of the part in the logical flow of the information in overall INFF concept for the building block 3, monitoring and review. And primarily we're talking about 3 major components, major sort of influence areas that the building block 3 provides. First is it's about understanding and revealing the volumes and impact of different types of finance. And interestingly, it's not an easy task for many, if not almost all countries, especially in the context of climate finance, where it has a cross-cutting nature, and even the reveal of the information is already a challenge, unlike some other SDG areas which traditionally have been part of the statistics and monitoring systems of financing flows. Secondly, we need to also track the progress in implementation of the financing strategy. Once the financing strategy is set, we need to have a ongoing regular process of the progress review, and this is natural element of any systems design. And the third is to assess what works and what doesn't work in the overall INFF design. So maybe we can have a feedback loop that will contribute to the first INFF building block on assessment. It may contribute to the second one in most of the cases, and it also can influence the fourth one. So here is the linkage of all these 3 influence areas to building block 4, where we can design some additional governance and coordination mechanisms to improve the monitoring and statistics gathering systems. Or, as I said, we can also provide information which is so much important for assessment and diagnostics part, as well as I said, it's very important to have the influence over the feedback loop for the building block 2. So what are the suggested steps in terms of understanding on the sequencing of establishing the monitoring system? First is to understand the baseline, to establish the baseline, and to identify what kind of systems are in place. And again, in the context of climate finance and NDCs, this is slightly more complicated area than for many other SDG areas. So there's an additional effort required for even understanding what kind of systems exist. And in the slides which will be shared with you, of course, there is a link. There are 2 links. One is for the checklist of self-assessment questions to go through the checklist and understand what kind of systems exist or not. And also to understand that actually, even if some systems exist, to understand the quality of those. So what is really working in those systems? Sometimes we have a monitoring system in place. You can visit a website, but it does not necessarily mean that the interlinkages, cross-linkages with data collection system, with other institutional monitoring system, with sometimes even with budget expenditure system, you can get some different pictures if the systems are not kept up to date, etc., etc. So all this, the quality component of the existing systems is also important. And then moving to the next step, to the second sort of step, is how we can strengthen and close the gaps that have been revealed. The first one is to institutionalize the INFF monitoring and review. And I will talk a little bit in the next slide about the country reflections. This is very important. In most of the countries, we still don't have a single political mandate carrier that will cover all climate finance related topics. It's cross-cutting in its nature. Sometimes the accountability framework is blurred, and no clarity about who is doing what and whether the financing flows are vertical versus vertical plus horizontal. By saying this, I mean how well the vertical mandate to one political authority can be later distributed across the horizontal relationship, or it has to follow the continuous vertical steps. And then it means that the parallel systems, parallel institutions will not be part of the same monitoring, financing flow monitoring system. They will have their own bottom-up monitoring system that no one knows and no one can assure that will culminate into the comprehensive picture of the monitoring. of financing system. Second is enhancing integration of the existing systems. And again, I will maybe give an example on how this is very important. Third is to link the ongoing or planned data statistical reform processes and make use of needs-based IT solutions. Automatization and digitalization of all these data collection systems is critical. Again, because of this cross-natural, cross-cutting nature of the climate finance, this is becoming even more challenging challenging issue. And finally, let's learn from each other. This is very important to understand who and what kind of experience peer countries have, and maybe we can get some of the experience and internalize and domesticate those experiences to better match the country context, but still learning from other countries' mistakes, experiences, etc., etc. So my final slide will be some of the reflections of what we have been observing in UNDP for the last over a decade. I can actually say that first, as I said, more institutional accountability, clarity on climate finance is required. This is critical for both the building block 2, but also building block 3 components. Public finance monitoring on climate finance often gets more regulated than private sector one. This is also an observation from many countries that the consolidated picture on public finance, including international public finance, is more structured and more operational compared to the private sector related one. Mitigation financing monitoring systems sometimes are more prioritized and than in some countries versus other countries, and vice versa. And there's actually a grouping of this experience by even at the level of big regions. Like definitely we have more priority in Europe on the mitigation related finances versus the adaptation, which is predominant, important, and priority for the Asia Pacific region and other regions. We need to increase the role of other actors to get engagement from the banking sector, from pension funds, other investment funds. They can have a significant role in NDCs with their financing assets. And then next actually lesson or observation is the need on interoperability of various monitoring systems. First, naturally, we need to have a comprehensive picture, because if there's a common goal, we want to understand the whole nature and whole picture about financing flows to help focusing the intervention and focusing the input, the outcome and impact of those financing investments. But secondly, we also need to avoid confusion and overlapping of some of the systems and information flows. There was a country case which has adopted both the climate finance budget tagging and also SDG budget tagging system at the same place, and both information would go to the parliament. But because of the different nature of methodology on the budget tagging and budget monitoring system on expenditures, the same budget package would present quite a significantly different picture in SDG financing monitoring system report versus the climate finance one. And none of them was wrong. Is that the difference in the nature and usability of this information made this difference. But we need to avoid this confusion. Parliament members sometimes don't understand all these details and nitty-gritty. So we need to make sure that we increase the interoperability of different systems, so the data set of one system can be understood and linked with the data set of another one. And sometimes we cannot avoid having few data sets. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but still interoperability is possible. And finally is that no need to wait for other INFF building blocks to be completed to start working on building block 3. This is also a lesson learned, and we know the countries that started with maybe something similar to building block 1 on assessment part for the climate finance back in 2011, 12, 13. So I'm talking about 10 years old processes. So those countries have started with an equivalent of building block 1. And then even without coming up with the financing strategy for the climate, they would already start working on monitoring system for climate finance. So it's, although that the sequence of the building blocks is naturally presented in the diagram of the 4 building blocks, still some elements of individual building blocks can be started earlier in building block 3, then some of the final products completed in building block 2, for example. I'm not talking about even building block 4, which is sort of so comprehensive that you can start at any point of the overall reforms. So I'll stop here, given the shortage of the time, and we'll be ready to contribute further. Thank you. Over to Tim or Mauricio.
Thanks, sir. Mauricio, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Hi, colleagues. Good morning. If you allow me to share, Tim or Catherine, I would appreciate it so I can present the PowerPoint.
You should be a co-host. Let me just double check that. Okay, you should have the ability to share now.
Yes, I have it right now. Okay, colleagues, good morning. My name is Mauricio Ruiz, and I want to show you a little bit of what we have done in INFF Colombia and possible linkages that we have with climate things. First of all, I want to start by doing a quick run on what we have done with other building blocks, and sometimes we jump over different building blocks, given that in Colombia we started first, or the country started first with building block 4, even without an INFF. So that's quite interesting to have had that starting point. But let me just mention something about this. In terms of building block 1, the government of Colombia, with support of INFF, has consolidated quite a portfolio, interesting portfolio of SDG financing related to diagnosis, current diagnosis. Some of the work that we have done with the government will be, let me see where I can post here in the chat. I want to put something on the chat right here. That link that I'm putting on the chat right now is a result of a year and a half of work with basically taking building block 1, all the diagnosis that we have done related to SDG financing, and put it in a sort of proposal for monitoring of SDG financing. What I would like to show you right now is this would be the result of that particular monitoring system that we are proposing the government to have for SDG financing. And I'm going to show you guys right now the case for 2022. These results, by the way, are you actually seeing what the different SDG financing by the 17 SDGs?
We can still see your slides, Mauricio. We can't see if you're on a...
Oh, okay, slides. All right. Okay, let me just stop sharing so that I can go ahead and show this one. Okay, here we go. So once we get into the link, you guys will be able to see this platform where we have put together the SDG budget tagging that we have done for 2020, 2021, and 2022. That map of SDG financing has also been implemented for 2020 Development Cooperation. And we have put together the criteria that we have done to classify jointly with the government what is and what is not aligned to different SDG targets. So once we go into the 2022, what we were able to gather by the analysis of from building block 1 to building block 3, basically by looking at the national budget, was that there is this level of SDG financing in Colombia. We did it at the 169 target, but then we're showing here the aggregation for 16, 17 SDGs. And what we see, and this is basically one of the key points of my intervention, is that we see that there is SDGs related to planet or planet SDGs are significantly being underfunded in Colombia when you look at the entire picture of the budget. So this is quite interesting finding that we have had. And going back to the presentation, that's the starting point that we have for both building block 1 as well as building block 3. So those are the kind of things that we have advanced in the past months to be able to achieve both building block 1 and building block 3. More recently, INFF Colombia is engaging with the government of Colombia to see what kind of linkages we can provide to the next national development plan. The next national development plan will be drafted in the next few months, starting in August. And so there is a huge opportunity for INFF to integrate into the next national development plan. And that's the progress that we have done in the past few weeks and months. In terms of sorry. So in terms of what we have done for building block 2, I want to show you here the 18 elements or ingredients that we have for our financing strategy. So we have 18 ingredients that we believe are going to be part of that SDG financing strategy. Obviously, one of the key points will be here, the one on climate finance, and as well as other topics. And so this brainstorming session will be has been very useful for us to see how we can strengthen that component or that piece of the puzzle that we have. In terms of the financing strategy, we want to go from SDG alignment, which is what we have done for the tax expenditures and development cooperation, and we want to move towards a more SDG-informed allocation and strategic decisions. So what we have done so far through the development finance assessment is be able to map the total amount of SDG financing that is available for the country, right? And what we want to do is continue that SDG alignment that we have done for some development flows, and especially do the same thing for the private sector. So we can have a proposal with the government on how we could rearrange those flows. The strategy that we have been thinking about will integrate 3 sort of options that the DFA gave us, and is the first option that the DFA gave us is focus on the highest priorities that the country might be able to pinpoint, right? We believe, but obviously we have to wait for the next national development plan. We believe it will be related to environmental affairs or basically NDCs. It will probably have to do with migrants and also equality of income and basically reducing inequality. And so we believe that it could be finance, or actually the proposal could be related to blended finance. At the same time, we also have been thinking about a series of reforms that came about from Colombia's DFA. And we also want to make sure that we propose using SDG costing options for realigning those development flows. So continuing with specifically with building block 3, Colombia, aside from the work that we have done with INFF Colombia, which is in the basically has been summarized in the link that I posted on the chat. The government of Colombia has advanced in establishing significant experience in establishing in 4 budget trackers. The government of Colombia also has a green framework for green bonds, which is a mechanism to make sure that the country is going to do a thorough monitoring of flows that come about from the issuance of green bonds. And obviously more related to the work that we have done with INFF Colombia is the SDG budget tagging and other deliverables related to that. However, we see that there are some fragmented activities, that these are fragmented activities and are not officially part of an INFF. In different conversations that we have had with the government wants to improve its current SDG site. It's a site that it currently has mostly events. It posts events, high-level political forums, PowerPoints related to those kind of things. However, there is no SDG financing, so we are hoping that the government will, in the next few weeks or months, be able to post the kind of Power BI dashboard that I posted on the chat here for you, officially on its webpage, both on the Ministry of Finance as well as the National Planning Department. At the same time, in terms of Building Block 3, the government of Colombia recently launched an initiative called the Multi-Stakeholder Platform, which links both Building Block 3 and Building Block 4. And the idea is to have a committee where the monitoring will be able to have a sort of like a committee level agreement on how the country should move forward in terms of its monitoring of SDG financing. There are some institutional challenges in Colombia. Specifically, the national budget has 2 monitoring mechanisms, one for investment projects and the other one for operational expenses. And development cooperation in Colombia has 3 heads. So those are important institutional challenges that Colombia will need to solve in the next, hopefully in the next year, in order to strengthen the monitoring of SDG financing, and specifically related for Building Block 3. In terms of how INFF is influencing financing policies, there has been increased awareness for SDG as a results-based approach. So we want to make sure, for instance, that the next National Development Plan doesn't have its own indicators, which is what happened with the current plan, but rather that it uses SDG indicators as a results framework itself. Then we have been able to provide input and build jointly with the government input on how SDG financing can increase evidence-based decision making. And what we are trying to hopefully accomplish is to drive stakeholders to a common SDG approach or framework instead of a fragmented approach from each UN agency that is currently present in country, right? There are multiple, obviously, as you guys know, stakeholders that are the reporting institutions for SDGs. And so we want to make sure that we have a common SDG approach instead of a fragmented one, which is part of the governance of Building Block 4. In terms of specifically the connection that have been made with NDCs or climate financing, I have to be very clear that in Colombia there has not been any integration between INFF and NDCs or climate financing. However, there's been some activities, as I mentioned, green bonds and some other sectoral approaches to climate financing. There is a lot of interest from the government, specifically also from the Ministry of Finance, in terms of using its current green framework for bonds to advance climate issues or climate financing in country, right? And so what we see from INFF Colombia is a good opportunity to work on a pilot of a climate INFF. Given that the new or the next national development plan will be drafted in the upcoming months, we see a chance and opportunity for INFF to be able to do a micro INFF, you can call it that way, a pilot of climate financing through INFF lenses in the next few months. And we could accomplish this by using the experience that we have in all the building blocks of the INFF. There are some challenges in that regard, and basically those challenges are related to, I believe that the most important is the institutional dynamic that is already consolidated for climate financing, right? And so INFF would be a latecomer into that sort of table of climate financing. So we would have to basically, on one side, have a more institutional approach where we would be able to sit on that table, as well as sort of repeat in sort of a process, building block 1, building block 2, or at least consolidate what has been done in climate finance through the lenses of building block 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we believe that that is a pilot that we could engage with if we really wanted to put together those two initiatives, INFFs and NDCs. And so we would be a latecomer, and that's one of the challenges. The second challenge is that there have been fragmented climate finance actions that have generated results and resources for SDGs 13 and 15, also through the green taxonomy, but there is not a long-term strategy with clear milestones, right? For instance, DFA gave us a recommendation that in terms of climate financing, there needs to be a medium-term operational plan with specific milestones, and also introducing the climate, the financing aspects within climate affairs, which has been very undervalued in country. And also we have the challenges, and this is my last remark, in terms of stakeholders that are supporting the national government. Here in Colombia, at least when we have engaged with the Ministry of Finance, there is only appetite to work sustainability affairs through other multilateral development banks and stakeholders. So there is the challenge of how we can also use DFA and use INFF on a higher level, especially given the change in government that we're undergoing. To position INFF, once again, with the new government, mention the recommendations of DFA that we gather in Colombia, and also be able to have a more a thorough approach where we can actually engage with all SDGs in country. I'm going to stop here. I think I have taken a lot of time, so thank you so much.
Thank you, Mauricio. That was a really rich insights into the process that's been held in Colombia, and fantastic to see the monitoring tool and the monitoring work that's been done there. As Surin had said, you don't need to wait to start on monitoring. And indeed, I think the work in Colombia is an example of that. We are slightly behind on time, so I'm going to pass straight over to Vito Intini, who's the lead economist for the Arab States region, and he'll be followed by Sylvain Merlin, who's the deputy resident representative for Egypt. So Vito, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tim. Hello, colleagues. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, great. So I'll be very fast because we are running really late. This session is on governance and the coordination, which is the last of the 4 building blocks, but actually cannot be the last. In many cases, as we heard, a lot of countries' processes have started with this because that building block will inform the whole process and guide the whole process, actually. So no need to say why it is important, because of course helps ensures country ownership and leadership, which is critical. As I just said, it will drive the overall process and also provide more effectiveness to the process itself. Now, we'll also strengthen collaboration partnership in three critical aspects or with three critical counterparts. One is obviously the government itself, within the government. The second one is within the national stakeholders. As we will see, there are a number of stakeholders that should be involved in the process. And the third one is with development partners for obvious reasons. What we have seen so far, based on the surveys that have been conducted, is that there are a lot of countries that are already taking these steps in terms of a more integrated approach in coordinating financing. The INFF itself has been institutionalized specifically at the nexus between the planning and the financing policy. A lot of cross-government committees include the planning ministry, but also many of the sector areas, sectors, ministries, and the areas of financing. And as we have heard earlier on, of course, the Ministry of Environment for this discussion in the nexus between the NDC and the INFF will be critical to be involved. We have seen also that more than 70% of countries with an oversight body have basically used or extended the function of existing committees or structures, which is a good rule of thumb to build incrementally the capacity of those oversight and coordination bodies. We have also seen that countries use financing dialogues increasingly to convene both public and private stakeholders. Now, in terms of the oversight committees, as you can see on the left-hand side of this slide, you see that a lot of Ministry of Finance and Planning have been involved in this exercise together with the Ministry of Economy. And then, of course, you have a number of line ministries involved. Increasingly, we see more representative from the private sector, chambers of commerce, commercial banks, but also regulators like central banks. Of course, the UN system is involved as well, but also we see increasingly IFIs and the academia in some respects. When it comes to the private sector, and here you have a snapshot of the type of private sector that have been involved in the processes, you will see that the business networks and also MSME representatives have been involved quite often. Also financial institutions, as I was saying, investors and other types of private sector representatives. What are the critical steps that we suggest and we invite to focus on? One is, the first step is identifying and assessing existing governance arrangements, as I was saying in the first slides. It's always good to build on existing processes and arrangements rather than build new or competing ones. And then, of course, it's important to enhance that coherence of those arrangements and close the gaps whenever are needed. These two critical steps are normally done across the three critical areas, which are commitment and leadership, because of course there needs to be a commitment and a leadership at a very high government level, at a high possible political level, that has also enough convening power so that that capacity could be fulfilled to the best of the possibility. But also access to knowledge and perspective is a critical aspect of these steps, where basically there needs to be exchange of information, lesson learned, reporting and transparency of reporting processes, and also assess and review the policies that have been put in place and that are going to be designed and then implemented in the future. The third critical area is coordination. Is coordination. And here, needless to say, the importance of it in terms of having clear, well-defined roles and responsibilities. And then, of course, again, intragovernmental mechanisms that are in place, as well as also coordination with development partners. And of course, the whole process needs to be demand-driven with that strong political and broad-based country ownership. Without further ado, let me pass the floor to my colleague Sylvain for his experience with the Egypt country office. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vito. I'm going to put slides on the screen, and while I do that, I really want to thank Tim and Catherine for bringing this together. This is really inspiring to share the diverse experience between the countries. So, can you see the slides?
Yes. Yes.
Good. So here in Egypt, where we are, so I'm quite conscious that we're trying to bring our experience in the light of building block 4 and in the light of NDC, which is a little bit difficult for us because NDC was not at the center, or environment was not at the center of our work until recently. And also building block 4 for us was not the one we were focusing on. And the reason for that is that we rarely sold the INFF as INF framework. We mentioned the INFF approach because for a long time we wanted to get some proof of concept in the Egyptian concept that this could fly, and we were focusing on assessment, diagnosis, and financing strategy, much less so building 3 and building block 4. So here on this summary, what you can see is that the first 2 building blocks are more inflated, and what you have on the left side is there with some good success, and I will mention that in more detail in a moment. Excuse me. But the focus was really to get going with building block 1, building block 2. So in a sense, we may not be the best example, but still, I think we can speak to the difficulties we're all facing. Now, I don't want to skip too fast this slide, just because you have here a summary of our experience that you might not see again later in the presentation. Essentially, what you have on within the dotted lines, this is what the UNDP and partners have been doing. What you see outside the dotted lines, it's part of the ecosystem. It's part of what the government or what the private sector is doing, or what other partners such as IMF are doing. So I'm not going to read everything, but I'm sure you recognize quite a few things. I just want to flag 2 of them. Tax Inspector Without Borders, and another one, which is the environmental, social, and governance disclosure requirements, which is a new thing for big firms in Egypt. They are required to disclose how they are doing with ESG, with a specific formula, and they have also, as part of that, a requirement to refer to the task force on climate disclosure. So that's 2 of them, and I'm not going to read all the others. So just I'll put just a few graphs to illustrate where we are and to signal that you will not find much of environment and climate in this product of the assessment so far. So that's for the public investments. That's for the public running cost, so operational budget. That's for ODA. And you see that here it's been truncated. We have the data for climate change and SDG 13, 14, 15, and to some extent 7, but it's much lower than the others, and it's not featured here. So we have all that. Now, when it comes to building block 4, the state of play for us is that we managed to, first of all, we set the oversight committee of the INFF, or the project that is pushing the INFF, as the SDG, the National SDG Steering Committee. So that as Vito mentioned, that's the natural thing to do. The difficulties was that until this meeting that you see pictured here happened, we were not sure would be successful, because the National Steering Committee for NDG itself has met only twice before that, and it was at the instigation of the UN during the MAPS process. So the solidity of the institutional basis is not completely clear, or was not completely clear yet. So of course, there are more junior committee, and one is called the technical committee, which we find very interesting, and we face this difficulty is that it's junior and it's not convening successfully at the deputy minister's level, which would be should be what's needed, but to some reason it's delegated, it's not super well attended. We had it twice. And we had something recently, which was a donor engagement that it's a little bit outside the governance building block, but we found it very useful to build the momentum and use the influence of donors such as the European Union and Germany, etc., so that they bring the INFF back in their discussion with the government, so that the loop is looped. So coming to this picture you see now on the screen here, you have 4 ministers. And importantly, so they nothing too much to read in the body language there, but these are strong ministries, and they don't really see eye to eye on who's boss and who should be leading this process. So that was quite a feat to manage to do that. We rely on the convening power of the Ministry of Planning, and that's the lady behind the Egyptian flag. The Ministry of Finance was the most aloof on the right side, and that was quite a success to have them there. They've been considering themselves as more of a technical ministry that should not engage in the SDG. So no, this has changed, but we are not progressing as fast or as seamlessly as what we have heard from other country offices today. So one thing we tried to do during this steering committee, and we're going to have another one in September, hopefully, was to not transform that into just a rubber stamping project board type of thing, but to really engage in the substance. So at the bottom, you have a snapshot of what we discussed at this meeting, trying also to link with the existing tools and the existing actors that these ministers know and manipulate. So there's a lot of things they are invested in. Sovereign Wealth Fund is one of them, and the green bonds is another one. The midterm revenue strategy with the IMF, that's very important to them because that's part of their borrowing, etc. And we try to stay away from what oftentimes gets into the discussion of the binding constraints, and we call them boundary conditions here. Egypt is a country with a lot of macroeconomists, and usually any discussion on financing turn into a wrestling match of discussing balance of payments, inflation control, and all this. And we try to keep that outside because it's not the the purpose of the discussion. One thing you may notice here is that there are two people that are not on the picture, but they were there. It's the director, the governor of the central bank, and the head of the National Statistical Institute. And that's very important for what will come later, hopefully. This has not reconvened again. Importantly, for what I'm going to discuss now on the NDC, the Minister of Environment is not on that picture, and she was not in the meeting yet. So now, before moving to environment, how is the INFF influencing financing policy? That's very unclear. And we don't want to attribute too much to the INFF, or at least to what we have done. Maybe more has come from the announcement of the EU regarding their global gateway and the links to INFF. But we can say for sure that no, INFF is part of the public discourse in Egypt, and oftentimes in the same sentence as costing SDGs or costing policies and discussing financing flows. One thing that's very positively going outside the public discourse is this loose reference to alternative financing. And things are getting a little bit more concrete. Recently, there was the Islamic Development Bank annual meetings held in Sharm el-Sheikh, and there we heard some very focused private sector and this loose talk about alternative financing, how to say that, instruments such as blending finance, that's a little bit less used, and there are more specific terms being used. There's some elements also that are coming quite clearly as part of the INFF, although when they emerged, they were not discussed as such. So some targets for green public investments, some discussion on the SDG bonds to follow on the successful emission of green bonds, and also discussion of that not only in the public sovereign sector, but also at the commercial level. And that happened also on the green bonds here. Now, there is also increasing focus on climate financing. And that's very good news for what we're going to move on. Very ambitious discussion also on climate budget tagging, but more broadly on greening the national accounts, which would go much broader and would include the private sector. Now, connection with NDC. The attempt to cost environmental SDGs came during the INFF, during the costing exercise. It was actually added to the project because it was not there at the beginning. And that came at the same time the government was drafting the National Climate Change Strategy, which was the precursor to the NDC, which was actually issued yesterday. And so you see it's very fresh. So this costing is here. You see highlighted in red the climate change aspect, with several estimates of cost that are converging nicely. The second item was that before the NDC was released, actually, there was a list of projects to support the National Climate Change Strategy that was issued. And this is I'm going to show it actually here. This is an excerpt of this list of projects. And there are two things that are interesting here. First of all, it's costed, which is quite good, but also there's a clear indication of what the government expects, highlighted also in red, where the source of financing should come. And it's actually going even further because it's not represented here, but there are amounts assigned to the government, amounts assigned to the private sector, amount assigned to IFIs or ODA in the detail of this list of projects. So that's a positive development. And I just want to highlight here that quite a large amount is thought that the private sector could contribute, and the loosely defined overfinance, oftentimes it's IFIs, is also quite big. No, this connection with NDC goes actually a bit further than this. As you may know, Egypt will host the COP27 for the Climate Change Convention, and with this opportunity, there are quite a few initiatives. So initiatives from private sector plus public sector plus civil society, the kind of things that come on the margins of the conventions, that will be discussing financing items. So one has been called just financing, and the other one has been called transparency in climate financing. So we're very hopeful. Some of that actually UNDP is engaged in, and we're very hopeful that this can help Egypt broaden its view on climate financing beyond its own NDC and INFF, and oftentimes they learn lessons on what's going on outside. Now, the barriers. And I'm zooming back a little bit here about the barriers, because the barriers are not so much on the NDC itself, but more on the INFF. So we, by definition, it's very much an interministerial process. And the ministries, as I said, to bring in the same room finance and planning has always been difficult. There are tensions, there are different interests, different processes. Sometimes we're involved in several competing processes, so that's a juggling match. Access to data, other colleagues mentioned that, quite difficult. It's not that the data is not accessible only, it's also that when we get the data that we were promised, it's actually much worse than we expected. So the M&E structures that Maurizio mentioned, we don't have them yet, we should have them, but talking about it too early will actually defeat the purpose. So we're a bit in a bind, actually. It's very crowded space in Egypt, maybe more than in other countries. There's a lot of IFIs that are headquartered here or with the original. So they're very active, European Development Bank, European Investment Bank, African Development Bank, ISDB, IMF, World Bank. They tend to muddy the waters and to talk about the same things in a different way, but not mention INFF and not mention the SDGs because they don't like it. It's just not their brand. So corporately, they don't go that way. So we are fighting that. UN agencies, there's a lot of UN agencies involved with us in the INFF. Quite frankly, it makes life very difficult because they have a very narrow view of things and also very corporately driven. Sometimes, as I said, the INFF is confused with monetary, fiscal, and macroeconomic policy discussions. We try to correct that, but we don't win all the time. And this is very recent in Egypt, as I said, issued yesterday, the second one. It's also an extremely sensitive topic politically. So talking about its financing, it's even worse because the financing has been promised in Paris in 2015, never came, and it's with Egypt as kind of a leader and host of the COP and trying to being the flag bearer of the global south on this 100 billion issue. And that's a very sensitive thing to say, well, the financing should be diverse and should be planned from your side. Then that doesn't work very much with them. But we're not giving up. We, as UNDP, encourage the NDC to be much more explicit on the financing mix that will be needed. And as I mentioned, also to work with other countries of the global south to think openly about that. And I think we should, beyond this meeting today, build some bridges with other countries that are about at the same level of INFF development with links to NDC to encourage what they have to say. So that's all from us, and looking forward to your questions, remarks. Over.
Thank you very much, Sylvain, and thank you to Vito before you. I know he's had to drop out as well, but it's really great to hear a little bit about the governance and coordination, some of the challenges, the positive direction within perhaps some challenging institutional context, within a challenging institutional context, but also some of the connections that are already being made around the NDC, despite some of the sensitivities, as you mentioned there. Colleagues, we've covered a lot of ground over yesterday and today. We've looked at the 4 building blocks, the 4+1 building blocks with the inception phase. We've heard about NDC financing strategies, and really, I think, gathered a lot of experiences and covered a lot of ground in a way that I think is really the start of a much larger and an ongoing conversation. We were planning to have some breakout rooms following on from yesterday. I think perhaps, given the time, what we might do today is just open now for a few questions. If there are some questions that colleagues have around some of the content that we've heard, some of the experiences, or indeed some reflections on the connections between NDCs and INFFs that you're seeing, and also particularly the role, as Kathy was saying at the beginning, the role of UNDP, the role that we can be playing at the country level in terms of prompting those connections and helping advance them. So perhaps if we open now for just a few questions or comments for around about 5 minutes or so, or 5 to 10 minutes or so, and we've got a short survey that we wanted to conduct, which is really to help us think about the next steps. As I said, this has been a very rich conversation, one that we see as a foundation or a stepping stone for further collaboration globally, regionally, and at the country level. So we've got a short survey that we'd like to conduct before we will leave, that will help us with the direction of travel there. But I'll stop here just to open for comments. So please, colleagues, raise your hands or speak up if you've got a question or a comment that you'd like to share. Verania, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, team, and thank you for all the presenters. This has been really informative and very useful. And just wanted to say that I have heard from many of you during the presentations, you know, a few references to the integration of social dimensions such as gender equality, but also other aspects that are relevant to not only to the INFF and the SDGs, of course, but also to the NDCs and the overall climate change agenda on adaptation and mitigation. And I just wanted to share with some colleagues and of course, team. I mean, you have been involved in this more than I, but I just wanted to make sure that colleagues attending today have access and knowledge to the guidelines, to the guidance note that was developed to support countries in integrating gender equality and social dimensions into the integrated national financing frameworks. I'm gonna drop it in the chat now. And just to say that I think it would be really interesting to see how to connect this experience with the NDC experience as well. As you may know, at least from the climate promise countries, 96% of the countries, as Jenny was mentioning yesterday, have included specific references to gender equality. And in some cases, countries have been quite specific in terms of including targets, actions and indicators. So I think this is a really good opportunity to also link from this side. And many countries are now under the Climate Promise 2, considering the integration of gender equality and social inclusion into their climate finance strategies or frameworks. So just to leave it there, and hoping that countries can take a look at, and our country offices can support this process as well. And the gender team has been leading in the development of this guidance note with the sustainable development, with the sustainable finance hub. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Verania. Yeah, a very important point there. And as you said, there is, I'll share some resources at the end of the webinar. There is that very useful guidance on mainstreaming gender equality within INFFs. Other colleagues, are there comments or questions that colleagues would like to raise? Maurizio, please go ahead.
Thank you, Tim. This is a question more, I think, to you, but please correct me otherwise. And is whether if we decided to, in INFF Colombia, integrate or actually do a sort of pilot INFF specifically for green topics or NDCs, do you think we should actually like engage in changing the overall programmatic document of INFF, or do you think that's something that we could do within existing program documents? Because I'm just wondering whether we should formally like move so many stakeholders to adjust the program document, or whether we can just proceed with the actual program document. Thank you.
Thanks, Mauricio. I see there are no other questions at the moment, hands raised at the moment, so I'll come back on that one. I think there's, I guess, I think you're talking about the joint SDG fund, which has been one of the key vehicles for driving a lot of the INFF activity in many countries. I mean, we could talk more about that. I think there is some flexibility within those programs to be able to shift. I think we've also recently launched the INFF facility, which is helping countries advance the INFF activities beyond the lifespan of the joint program for those that have a joint program, or indeed for those that don't. And then I think part of the conversation that we're just starting here between the INFF, the Sustainable Finance Hub team, and the Climate Promise team is to think about how to support countries with this integration. So we haven't yet mapped that out. I think we were very much looking at this as a first step in that conversation and collective brainstorming exercise. But I think we will intend to come back, and perhaps Kathy can say some more, with some more tangible options later down into the year. Kathy, I don't know if you want to come back already, or I can see Rosemary's hand is.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that we should have definitely have a discussion with Colombia, because Colombia is one of the countries we are currently supporting under the Climate Promise Phase 2. We should definitely brainstorm on how to do this. We will be very, very interested in doing the pilot that Mauricio is mentioning. So let's take that offline. Rosemary has her hand up.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm wondering if there is an opportunity for the development of some sort of joint communities of practice between the two teams, so that we could continue the discussion that started yesterday, which was actually very interesting. It seemed to fly, so clearly there's a lot to be discussed. So some sort of joint communities of practice would be, I think, a good place for us to sort of see where the opportunities can arise, and then we would be able to discuss further. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. I mean, I for one think that's a fantastic suggestion. I see no other hands raised, so I'm actually going to use that as a great segue into the short poll that we've got.
May I intervene, Tim?
Oh, please, Ababu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tim and colleagues, for this very informative presentation. Ethiopia has prepared finance strategy for the implementation of its updated NDC. So my question is, how we can then proceed to IFF? We are not part of Climate Promise 2, irrespective of the very interesting results that we have achieved under Climate Promise 1. We are not part of Climate Promise 2. So any idea how we can move from our finance strategy, very comprehensive finance strategy for update NDC, to IFF? Over to you, Tim.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ababu. That's a great question, and perhaps this is another conversation we can take offline in more depth. There are a number of countries that have started from a more specific financing strategy and then broadened out to use that as a base for a wider financing strategy, the wider adoption of the INFF approach at large. Let's have a follow-up conversation. It would be great to also bring in Aurea, the regional advisor. And we have, through the INFF facility that we've recently launched, as well as other mechanisms, options that you can draw down on. So perhaps with Climate Promise colleagues and Aurea, we can take that conversation forward. This is great, colleagues. This is one of the things that we definitely wanted to do with this, was to identify a number of countries that would be interested in these quite tangible steps. So thanks to those who've spoken out, and for others, please do follow up. I'll open this survey now. So please do take just a couple of minutes to provide your feedback on the discussions that we've had yesterday and today, and also, as we've been saying, within light of this as the start of an ongoing conversation, your thoughts about how we can take this forwards, about the type of support that would be most useful to you as we move ahead. So please take a couple of minutes now to answer these questions. We'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks.
Tim, I think you have to take away the co-host right of some of our colleagues to be able to answer.
Yeah, for the presenters now, thanks.
Yeah, the presenters. And colleague, this survey is for country offices. You will see that the questions are very much geared towards country offices. So those in the regional hubs and HQ, you don't have to fill it out.
Sorry if I missed some of the options. Is one, 2, or 3? Is that in this case, would 1 be a good, or because I'm only getting options for
thank
1,
you,
2, 3.
Mauricio.
Yeah.
Sorry, it looks like the labels have dropped off. For question 4, this is, so what type of support would your country office find most valuable? I think option 3 would be most valuable. Option 1 would be least valuable.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
For the,
So 1 most valuable and 3 least valuable.
sorry, Sylvain, the other way around. 3 most valuable, 1 least valuable.
Okay.
Colleagues, I do apologise that the labels have dropped off there. So just to confirm, 3 most valuable and 1 least valuable.
I'm not sure if I'm missing one of the questions, but I've answered all of them, and it's saying I've only answered 5 of 6, so I can't submit.
Okay, so sorry about that, Rosemary. I can't see your answers until you've submitted, but I think the first 5 questions are mandatory before you submit.
Tim, if I can just, yeah, you need to answer J as well, which is in the in the 3rd question, because I also have the same issue, but I submitted. So you have to put an answer for J, and it will submit.
Oh, great! Thank you.
Tim, really, it's a difficult test. We were not told about the quiz.
I apologize, colleagues. As you can see, we've had a few technical issues. We've been light on technical support for this, so I apologize for bearing with us. At the end of a 2-hour session, it's a tough test, like Stacey. I'll leave it for just 1 more minute before I close the poll, and then I know we're 4 minutes over, so thank you for staying with us. But I'll just wait for 1 more minute and then close the poll, and we can close the session. Thanks, colleagues.
Okay, so Tim, the ones that I didn't think would be relevant, I put A1 because that was the only way I could submit, right? And just to say, from our region of the world, 1 is usually preferred and 3 is usually the least preferred.
No, thank you, Rosemary. I'm sorry, the label dropped off.
No problem.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I will end the poll there and just bring the session to a close. I think you should be able to see the results on your screen now. I think this has been a very rich couple of days. Thank you all for spending the time with us to go through a lot of content that we've covered. It's been great to hear from so many country offices and to hear the experiences both on the NDC side and on the INFF side. And as I think many colleagues have this is the start of a conversation that we'll take forwards ever closer between the two teams and the 2 lines of work. I'm sure you're looking at the results of the survey. I can see that 44% of you have said that there are tangible opportunities to integrate NDCs within an INFF that is under development. So that's very positive. There's another 17% of countries where there may be scope that can be explored further. And thank you, colleagues. Apologies for the mix-ups, but thank you for the information around the ways that it's useful to take the support forwards. I can see that there's a lot of appetite for sensitising government officials, further South-South exchange and experience sharing for convening discussions and a number of other steps. So thank you, colleagues. This has been a really rich discussion. I won't say too much because we've already run slightly over, but we're going to run another iteration of the webinar in a couple of weeks with for colleagues on Eastern time zones. And we will, off the back of both of these discussions, follow up with you all and work out some tangible ways forwards. If you as colleagues from Colombia and Ethiopia have just highlighted, if you're particularly interested in following up around a pilot that integrates the area of work, please do reach out to myself and or Kathy, and we'll continue the discussion from there. The recording will be made available, and I'll just flash up on screen. We've got a number of resources available on the INFF. Please do explore further. Please do explore further the INFF knowledge platform. That's inff.org. We've got a number of country experiences that you can find out more about through various formats. There's the methodological guidance, which you've heard a little bit about, but is articulated in much more depth on the platform. And then we've actually, coincidentally, just today launched the State of INFFs 2022 report, which goes into much more detail about where countries are and where they're progressing. So please do check that out, as well as our colleague Barani was guidance on gender equality within INFFs, as well as others coming up in the future, decent work and other topics. So colleagues, I will close there. Thank you very much for all of your time and for your insights and the experiences and thoughts that you shared. I look forward very much to taking this conversation further together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Bar.
Au revoir, merci.